Representatives, and he joins us here right now. Congressman, good to see you.
Hey, it's really good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me. And yeah, what a time. What a freaking week. You can see the raw emotions of the House. It's like, yes, in a way, there's something about that, like raw emotions. But when you're yelling at somebody for fake eyelashes, you've just turned the corner from like, here, we're passionate about abortion policy to, hey, it's friggin' high school here. This is high school doing adult work. It's just
and we throw in AOC calling another member of Congress baby girl. What's just going on?
Yeah. Well, I mean, there was a reason why she was kept off committees for 2 years, you know.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's you know, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to take over and just interview you guys here, but you struck a note with me, which is like, this is okay. So I served 12 years in Congress. Let's tack on the 2 years I was running for Congress before that. And it's been a year since I've been in Congress. So I've been around this business for 15 or 16 years, probably, you know, as long as you guys have too. And I look and I'm like, we used to do adult work in Congress, not adult work, but, you know, grown-up work in Congress. And we didn't even have near as big of issues to deal with as there exists today. You have just shy of a world war, a huge regional war, tensions everywhere, and we put a bunch of children in Congress. I don't miss it, but I sit here and I'm like, man, we need a dose of grown-upness again.
It's performance theater. And people, I think, are tired of it. At some point, they'll walk away from it, but the damage is being done. And, you know, I mean, even speaking of adult work, there's been adult films taken on the floor of the Congress. I mean, it's ridiculous. But that's why you're here, because you represent, at least to us and to so many people, Adam, the kind of maturity and decision making and judgment that, you know, people may not agree with, but they have to respect. And that's what we want to talk about.
It is kind of ironic, too, I think, in a way that most Americans learned your name narrating the committee and their concerns for our future in a time, I think, that Americans went back and forth from anger and concern for the future of the country and the republic, which I think you can realistically say that that's a legitimate concern today. What was that experience? I mean, everything that led up to that, obviously, you know, serving Congress for 10 plus years, and then finding yourself with two other members of Congress, Representative Cheney, and why am I pulling a blank on?
It was just us. It was just us too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Describe that experience and how surreal it must have been, and the reaction from your colleagues and your I guess the people from your district.
So there's a life lesson in it, which I'll say at the top, which is, look, I think people fear more than they fear death. They fear being kicked out of their tribe, and they fear losing their identity, right? You know, identity is so important to us. You know, if you talk to somebody, it's like, what do you do? Well, you know, if somebody asks me what I do, I don't tell them that I'm a father, right? That should be my identity. I tell them, you know, now I say I'm on CNN or I wrote a book or whatever it is. And so that's something that frightens people. And so, like, look, I think it's more common to see somebody that would jump on a train track and push a kid out of the way and die than somebody that would leave their political party. So I say that to say this. The process of what I went through was very excruciating. Because if you think about it, being in for 12 years, building your social circle on that identity. You know, I have friends from the military. As you guys sadly know, the military is very partisan. You know, I have friends. I had one friend 2 years ago that wrote me and said he was ashamed to have ever flown with me in Iraq. My co-pilot in the war said he was ashamed to have ever flown with me. He's now a pilot for an airline, by the way,
wow.
Which is frightening. You know, I had my extended family that sent me a certified letter disowning me, telling me I was part of Satan's army. Now, I don't say that to say, like, you know, hey, I want you guys to have sympathy for me. But I say that to say, when you make a decision, even if you're a member of Congress, and especially if you're, you know, a regular citizen that has nothing to do with Congress, you make a massive sacrifice because you tear yourself out of, you know, that entire circle you have. And so just briefly, and then I'm happy to answer any questions on it. Like, if I went back in time, I'd do it all the same, maybe just harder. And I have no regrets whatsoever. But if I'd have known what I would have, gone through, it would be a tough decision to make. Because the thing that bothers me is less, that I had to go under the January 6th committee and we did what we did. It's the fact that I had 200 some colleagues around me that knew the truth, that absolutely refused. Look, God gives us all very special moments and very special assignments. If he gives you the assignment, or you happen to seize it, whatever your religious belief is, and you end up representing 700,000 people, that is 10 soldier fields of people. To not stand up and do the right thing when that calls, to me, is anathema. And I think that's what bothered me the most in this process, is to watch 200 people that I had a great deal of respect for, that I thought every one of them had an internal red line, watch them, including the people, by the way, with the exception of Liz Cheney, that voted to impeach Donald Trump with me. A lot of them went quiet. That was a big disappointment. So I can answer any questions about that. But the top line, that I think from the personal perspective is what was most impactful.
Adam, as you look back on what is it within you and maybe your upbringing that got you to do the right thing even when it was painful, right? And in terms of studying human behavior, do you look back and go, I had to do this because X, and then how you were raised or what belief system you have? Your colleagues don't differ very much from you. What do you think that distinction is? It's
a really good question. Look, I had a situation on the streets of Milwaukee where, this is back in 2006, I had to intervene on a guy murdering his girlfriend. And I tell people, I'm like, and I disarmed him. I had no weapon. He had a knife, right? And especially Frank, don't fight a guy with a knife when you don't have anything. It was a miracle. But anyway, I say that to say, when I was making that decision, if somebody would have whispered in my ear, Adam, run, I probably would have ran, right? Like, so this idea that there is something that is just like, I was born with this gold, plate of armor, and it's decisions that we make on a daily basis that impactfully lead up to what we're going to do. And those decisions I made came far before January 6th. When I ran for Congress, so I wear on my wrist Andreas O'Keefe, who's a friend of mine that was killed in Iraq. And this is when I was in Congress. Before, I had just gotten back from Iraq. I ran for Congress. And I remember thinking, if I'm going to take a vote on, life or death for somebody, if I'm going to vote to acquit people for war, and I said this to myself, and then I said it out loud a few times, I have to be willing to give up my career for the same cause, for the country. I mean, look, now that I'm 46 and I'm kind of past the I'm young and invulnerable stage, now that I have a kid and I understand what life really is, I truly understand what the ultimate sacrifice means. Because it means literally your movie and everything you've invested to this point, gone, right? That's what the ultimate sacrifice is, gone for people that you'll never know, and people you may even hate, some of them. And we're asking 18 and 19-year-olds to be willing to do that for this country, to end their movie like a quarter of the way through. And yet we have people in Congress that are unwilling to sacrifice $174,000 a year job because it would just be too painful to their identity. And I say that like I'm getting emotional, because to me, that's what I was screaming to my colleagues the whole time, is like, this isn't some disagreement on tax policy where we all can have a different view and we can compromise a little bit. This is existential to whether or not democracies can survive. So I think I was lucky. You can call it God ordained or whatever. I was lucky that I began to think that way at the very beginning of my career. I thought that like a career-ending vote was going to be, Social Security reform,
right.
Not this, but there you go. Right.
Well, your career of service started, at age 20, you ran for what, county commission or something, and you won. You were a college kid.
Yeah.
It started early.
It was funny because it was before young people were really getting involved in politics. So it was kind of like an anathema. I remember the front page of the Panagraph, which is the paper in Bloomington, Illinois. It had my picture, and it's just basically, I paraphrase the headline. It's like, what? What did we do? Yeah. I beat some 60-year-old. But yeah, it was a good foray into politics and into service.
Hey, be careful about disparaging 60-year-olds on this show.
I'm getting close.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And the you know, before we get into the meat of January 6th and your service in that capacity, I think we need to just quickly revisit your military service because, again, people need to understand that service is part of what Americans do. And, just briefly tell us where you were in the military, where you were signed, missions flown, aircraft flown. I'm impressed that you flew the big ones, the straddle tanker. But tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I joined in, it was 9/11, and, I actually graduated college already. I went to Illinois State. I was not an academy kid. I didn't go to ROTC, and I'd always been told, it's a good lesson. I'd always been told you got to be great at math and science and have all these high-level degrees to fly for the Air Force. First off, it's not true. It's really just determination and can you fly. But secondly, I didn't let people tell me no. After 9/11 happened, I was lucky I got into the Air National Guard, which anybody that knows the difference between the Air Force and the Air National Guard, there's really no difference except that you kind of get transferred on your own terms and you get to pick what plane you're flying. So I got commissioned in 2003 as a second lieutenant, and then I went to officer training. But I flew, then I went to pilot training, which is a year and a half long. And I flew the KC-135 for 2 years. That's the big mid-air refueler. It's a cool plane, cool mission. I got bored of it. Flying over Iraq at 30,000 feet. So I found out about the RC-26, which right when the surge had happened, this was the very first, as far as I know, manned intelligence surveillance reconnaissance, ISR platform to go over to Iraq. Up to that point, we were working with the FBI doing domestic surveillance on drugs and stuff like that, some border work, which we did after the war too. So I flew that until I really just retired a few months ago from the Air National Guard. And but that took me to Iraq a number of times, Afghanistan a number of times, in the tanker all over Asia, dealing with Korea and those issues, and then a lot with the war on drugs, the war in the United States on drugs, and some of the border issues, which are very serious. I saw them firsthand because I worked them. And so I did 22 years, retired as a lieutenant colonel, and I miss it every day. Honestly, guys, and you may relate to this in some capacity, every night I dream that I'm either flying an airplane or I'm like showing up at the squadron bar in the military. It's really weird because it's like the squadron bar in my dream is way more fun than it is in real life. But in my dream, it's this epic party.
Yeah. We both had careers, Adam, where you really your identity becomes wrapped up in the career, and I get that entirely. In fact, I was going to say, congratulations on your retirement, but I stopped myself because it's really not a celebratory thing. It's something that you've just passed through a milestone as opposed to celebrating something.
It's bittersweet. That's a good way to put it. It's bittersweet.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you heard about when General Kelly recanted the suckers and losers comment? I would imagine that every person that ever lost a friend or just served had to that was almost unbelievable. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, you mean when he was talking about what Trump had said about suckers?
Yeah, President Trump at the time had said that anybody that died over there was a sucker and a loser, and then later on the story about where he wouldn't visit the troops because it was misty and he didn't want his hair wet. I mean, look, it doesn't surprise me, and it almost doesn't anger me anymore because I expect no different from Trump. I mean, I remember when he went after McCain. I was a huge McCain guy, by the way. I actually was friends with McCain. I was a McCain delegate in 2000. And I remember when he went after McCain and said, I like guys that weren't captured. Who says that? Fourth graders that are trying to be idiots. I don't know. Anyway. Can I jump in there real quick?
It's coming from a guy who got out of service with claiming bone spurs.
Yeah, Adam, I was on Fox with Leland Vittert on the weekend. It was the week that the ship had pulled into Hawaii, and Trump had him cover over the USS McCain. So I'm on the show, and I told my wife, I said, I loved McCain. I'd met him a couple times, and I'd met his daughter quite a few times, and his wife. So I held up a picture of McCain over my face, and I got forever kicked off. It's on my Twitter page, but I mean, I just had that one moment where I thought I'm just gonna, because he was in my mind, when he didn't go home when he could have early, and he let somebody else to stay another year and a half in that box. That's all you got to know about the guy. That's right there. All you have to know about him.
And then to dare spread this idea that he broke and call him Songbird. Look, one thing you learn in SEER training, which is survive, evade, resist, and escape, and you go through that definitely as a pilot. one thing you learn is you will break.
Right. Yeah.
You will break. Like I broke in like 48 hours in using enhanced interrogation techniques, and I knew it wasn't real. Like if I was being really tortured by the VC, yeah, I probably would have. So,
Amazing.
but it just, to quickly answer your question, it makes me sick every time I hear Donald Trump, because I know that the narcissistic depths of him, and this is why I viscerally can't stand him. And I'll just be clear here. The reason I viscerally can't stand him is because the man that occupies the most powerful position in the world, I'm sure every president in American history has been a narcissist to some level, but they can still take that narcissism and channel it to doing what is best for the country, except one, and that's Donald Trump, who cannot see past what it means for him if the most heroic Medal of Honor recipient called Donald Trump a bad president. He would throw that Medal of Honor recipient under the bus, I have no doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. You and I had a conversation, Adam, about kind of this topic of how we should be addressing Trump. And it really caught my attention. And that is that, you know, I'm on TV regularly claiming accurately that, as you said, just today, that Trump poses an existential threat to our democracy. And yet you acknowledge that. And you also talked about the way you approach Trump in that regard as being maybe, and I came away thinking maybe that approach is more effective and efficient with Republicans, which is that you call them a weenie.
Yeah.
You know, and it may seem insignificant, but it really struck me because we're all looking for a more effective way to get people to rethink Trump. And tell us about your approach to that and just depicting him as kind of incompetent and weak.
So my political organization, a quick plug here, Country First, country1st.com. And one of the areas we're focusing on is niche areas where we can make a difference. I'm not going to just create another, I love Lincoln Project, but I'm not going to create another Lincoln Project ad and just put it on the internet, right? We got to micro-target people. And when you and I are talking and say, Donald Trump is scary to us, there is his base, not all of them, most of his base though, loves it. Because to them, he is ticking off, he is frightening the very people they want to be frightened, right? This is what happens in authoritarian movements, by the way. Yeah. The reality though, is that Donald Trump, I mean, if he walked into my house right now, there would be a smidge of like kind of, I mean, I've met the guy 100 times, but there'd be a smidge of like, okay, he's the president. But I'd just be like, I never once in the Oval Office with Donald Trump felt any sense of awe, not because of the Oval Office, but because of him. And he is the weakest, whiniest, victimist. And by the way, as a Republican, we used to be the party that prided ourselves on being against victim culture. We are the propagators of victim culture now. And by the way, how this guy was president for 4 years, the most powerful man in the world, and yet the deep state was able to defeat him. No other president's been defeated by the deep state, but Donald Trump in the most powerful position got defeated by this deep state. And I think when you start at a certain subsection of people to say, this guy's the biggest, I wish I could use a different word, the biggest sissy that ever existed, really, and particularly in the Oval Office, there's a subset of people that would sit there and go, you know what? Yeah, I'm kind of tired of his belly aching. If my child belly ached as much as Donald Trump and whined about being a victim as much as Donald Trump, like I'd probably kick him out of the house. He's only 2.5, but you know, who knows?
Hey, do you get a sense, though, can I jump in real quick on that? Do you get a sense, though, that the good that's coming out of this is, for example, that the fact that you and Representative Cheney have been embraced by so many independents and Democrats for what you did, and that we can all, this will end at some point, I believe, and we will be on the other side of this, and hopefully have learned a valuable lesson. That's my hope, is that when this is over, that, you know, we can, I remember as a kid, you know, seeing Ted Kennedy and Orrin Hatch having lunch at the Palm, right? Mm-hmm. Today, you never would see that. It just doesn't happen now, right? And I get a sense that that's the good side of this, right? I mean, and hopefully we'll get there soon. But I love your idea.
Yeah, look, okay, my 50,000 foot view is this. the next year is going to be awful, and everybody needs to be ready. And I say that not to be like Debbie Downer, but to say, take that burden on your shoulder that you're carrying and drop it, because you have to stay engaged. If you think the whole world relies on you, you're going to tire out. You're going to give up. We all know people that have given up, right? People that were on our side that are like, I'm done. I'm just done. Well, the problem is the force of authoritarianism, they get like jazzed on what's going on this chaos. People like us get tired. So drop that burden. This is going to be a tough year. But I think the intervening year, no matter who's president, honestly, whether it's Biden or Trump, the years leading up to 2028, I think are going to be vibrant. It's going to be candidates with all new ideas, all new direction. And it's going to be a new generation. You realize Gen Xers have never had a president, by the way. And as a tail end Gen Xer, I'm kind of like, we need to get a Gen Xer president. But like, so I look at that. When I have traveled around this country, on my book tour and speeches and everything else now, the number to sit in front of a group of liberal Democrats, of progressive Democrats, and realize that I have more in common with them than my own party. Maybe I don't agree with them on every issue on, whatever, but there is a level of respect, except for the Gaza people. They're totally something different. But in true progressive leftism, there's a level of respect for what Liz and I did. There's an understanding that, like, the sane right, as small as it may be, the center and the left have got to create an uneasy alliance to defend democracy. And I think there's a renewed understanding that, quite honestly, our differences in opinion is a good thing. That's why we have democracy. We need that. Look, as a conservative, I need liberals. Liberals need me. I'm actually not super conservative anymore. I guess I'm center right. And so, yeah, it's actually heartened me, because I've gone in my own life from thinking that Democrats were people that had an upside down view of the world to recognizing there's actually way more in common with all of us together. I mean, they're the frickin' hawks on foreign policy now. I agree more with Democrats on foreign policy than I do the Republicans. But I say all that to say, let's celebrate, it's going to sound cheesy, celebrate our differences, celebrate our political differences, come together and recognize that if we want to argue these things out in the future, in the next few months, we've got to put our differences aside and defend our democracy. And I've been really inspired by seeing how people take to that message.
This is an important message of encouragement, I think, because, if my social media following is any indication, there are people out there who are actually seeing therapists, the angst, the anxiety, the depression, the hand-wringing, and it's not healthy. It's not healthy. And I think the word that you've given here is, look, Chip mentioned we will get through this. Now, how long, I don't know. And then Adam, you said, look, we got a new generation of leaders in the wings. We'll come out of this hopefully stronger than we were. And I think that's an important message.
And we'll keep out of it. We'll get out of it stronger. And also, look, what is it? What's the old saying? It's like, we're one in a million, but we're also one of a million, right? If you're part of a law enforcement agency or you're part of the military, the one thing I know is if I never went to Iraq would still be in the same position. But I also know I made a difference in Iraq, because I knew that, being at church and being one of the 10 guys lifting the table, right? Any one of the 10 guys could walk away and you're still going to lift the table. And I'm looking at that going, that's how we have to see our role here in defending this country, is like, take the burden that it's all on me off your shoulder. And by the way, I'm talking to myself too, because I carry this burden. Take that off your shoulder, take a deep breath. And as it would always drive me nuts, John Boehner would tell us, guys, be happy warriors. And I'd be like, as a young 35-year-old congressman, how can you be a happy warrior when there's X, Y, and Z going on? But he was always like, let's be happy warriors.
Happy warrior. I like it. So speaking of warriors, tell us about January 6th, literally that day, what it looked and felt like to you. And am I correct that I've read that you had a sense that something was not going to go well? And tell us how that played out for your instructions to your staff and even your wife.
Look, when you're a democracy, the only thing you need for a democracy to survive, this is it, is just an agreement that, hey, once every couple of years, we're going to vote. We're going to count the votes. Whoever wins is going to occupy and attain a certain amount of power for a certain amount of time. That's the only contract you need. You don't have to agree on anything else. Donald Trump, after the 6th, or after the election day, he was damaging that contract. That's what's so dangerous about this. January 6th was a symptom, a terrible day, a symptom of what happens when you convince a significant amount of the country an election was stolen. Well, what happens, because I was raised in these liberty circles, right? These, like, I never wore a tricorn hat because I'm not a dork, but a lot of people did, you know? And so I was a Civil War reenactor. That's a whole nother, I was just a nerd as a kid. But anyway, I was Union, by the way. Thank you.
Okay. All right. I'm glad we clarified that.
I wouldn't have told you if I wasn't. So
That's great.
But, you know, like I knew that when you convince people an election is stolen, there's going to be violence. Now, is it right today or is it in the future? You know, I didn't know. But I know this, if I truly believed the election was stolen, I would have been there on January 6th in a different capacity, because we were a country found on revolution. And so I'm watching this thing progress. Obviously, I'm outspoken. I'm already starting to get threats against me and my family, including people threatening my wife, just because why not, right? Eventually, they threatened my 6-month-old child while I was on the committee, saying things like they wish he would go out into traffic and get killed. And boy, you know, always coached in the name of Jesus Christ, by the way, which is not the Jesus Christ I follow. And so we got up to that day, and on the 1st of January, we had a conference call with all the Republican members of Congress, and I was the first to talk after kind of Kevin McCarthy spoke. And I said, Kevin, because it's right about when Kevin announced that he was actually going to oppose the election certification, which was a shock to us, because leadership usually does the right thing. And I said, Kevin, we have convinced a significant amount of the country that that the election was stolen. I said, I'm concerned there is going to be violence on the 6th. I'm looking at Twitter. I'm seeing this. And Kevin's response to me was, okay, Adam, operator, next caller. So on the 6th, I tell my staff to stay home. I ask my wife to stay home. I go into my office. I take my gun for the first time. Usually I'm armed, but I never take my gun to the Capitol because there's, 10,000 police officers or whatever. I took my gun that day, and I'm walking around the Capitol, and I remember I see a lot of MAGA hats, and the Capitol was closed, so I don't know how they got in there, like in the complex. But I go to the floor for the start of the proceedings. I start to get indications of, look, it looks like the perimeter has been breached. Remember, it was about a 45-minute delta between when the perimeter was breached and when the news even started reporting it. It was weird. So I go back to my office, and I'm like, this is going to be bad. By the time I get to my office, it was the alarms had sounded and everything else. I'll tell you a unique thing. So I'm sitting there. I call my wife on the phone, and she said, hey, go to cspan.org. They have like cameras everywhere in the Capitol. And I put on the camera for Statuary Hall, which is just outside of the floor of the Capitol. And that's where you saw like this kind of the very first of the crowd inside the Capitol confront the police. I watched that, and I remember I opened my window behind my desk, which then overlooked the Capitol where all this battle was happening. And I heard boom, bang, pop, like explosions. And it had just happened to be right when DC Metro showed up, and they used all the non-lethal to protect the Capitol. They saved the Capitol, by the way. They don't get enough credit. But I got to tell you, I don't say this much, but I felt just a darkness that I've never felt in my life. Now, I'm not one of obviously, I'm a man of faith. I've said it, but I'm not one of these that walks around and senses a demon in every corner kind of thing, right? I'm not. I'm a pretty mainline Protestant. But that moment, I just felt this darkness that was thick, and I can't explain, and it felt evil. Now, maybe it was psychological, maybe it was real, depends what you believe. But from that moment on, I'm basically barricaded in my office with my gun out for 3 hours. I'll wrap it up to say, I gave a speech that night. I was furious. Everybody asked me, I used to say, like, I went to the floor and I was all, oh, the majesty of democracy survives. It's BS. That's not what I thought. I actually got to the floor and I was really furious. And I gave this speech about how the emperor has no clothes. But when I left at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, I remember I saw my first National Guard troops. And that was the first time I really kind of broke down and shed a tear, because we'd been waiting for the Guard, as you all know. It was a beautiful sight. And as a guardsman myself, I was very proud and sad that they were there. So that was my story on that day. And it was from that day, I remember getting up early the next morning after just a few hours of sleep. I called for the 25th Amendment. I was the only Republican to vote for it when it came to the floor. And I just was like, this guy is mentally unfit for office. He's a disaster and unfit.
Adam, George Stephanopoulos interviewed Mike Stiegler, the duty officer in the Situation Room that day. And he said that Trump never called to check, and that he believes that Mike Pence, the Vice President Pence, was very close to danger, and that he did not get in one of the cars because he didn't recognize the Secret Service agents.
That's
and
right.
I don't think that story has ever really fully been fleshed out to the American public, just how close this really came to being. I mean, if they had killed, people inside that building and the vote had not happened, I don't know what would have been the next step.
Yeah, I mean, that's the interesting thing. So there's so many like what ifs here that, I've said part of the problem, and it's a good thing, but it's part of was that more people almost were killed and didn't get killed. So it feels like it didn't really happen. Like, we don't want more people to be killed, but that was like a thing. Yeah, Mike Pence at one point almost didn't trust the Secret Service. And there's more to this story that seems to be coming out because we find out there's an investigation into the Secret Service texts. As Frank can tell you, and it's the same in the military, there's sometimes a culture in law enforcement and military that you got to worry about a little bit. It's not to denigrate them, but it's a reality, just like any part of society. But it came very close. I mean, what was it? The mob at one point was 10 feet from the vice president. You think about the fact, look at this. On the Senate side, as they're evacuating the Senate floor, a clerk happened to think, nobody else on the floor, 200 people on the floor even thought to do it. A clerk happened to think to grab the mahogany box with the electoral votes in it. Had she not grabbed that and those votes been destroyed, you technically could not count the vote, because there is no indication in the Constitution that you could say, okay, we don't have the votes from Pennsylvania because they were torched, literally burned. But we just looked at the Pennsylvania Times and they said they went for Biden. You can't do that according to the Constitution. And part of the plan of the insurrectionists like Jim Jordan was to simply say, we want to push this past January 6th because constitutionally, if Congress doesn't certify the president on that day, Congress gets to vote for the president. And Congress would have elected Donald Trump.
Wow.
But to Nancy Pelosi's credit, to McConnell's credit, yes, granted, it was the next day at 3 a.m., but they held firm to say we were going to get it done. Because if we would have recessed for a week to clean this mess up and figure it out, they literally could have challenged us to the Supreme Court. And I would have told you a week ago, the Supreme Court never would have heard that challenge until I find out Sam Alito's wife or him flew an upside down Stop the Steal flag. Now you start to realize maybe there is something else here. And so it was a very dangerous day. And the worst part about it is for 187 minutes, a man with the impulse control of a toddler, with the inability, and I've seen this firsthand. I've met with him dozens of times. I would go and talk to him about Syria. John Bolton would bring me in to talk to Trump about Syria, so I would be the last person he'd talk to before he made a big decision. He'd do that with like Liz Cheney and I. He has no impulse control. He cannot resist peer pressure. That is one thing that Donald Trump can't do. But for 187 minutes, he actively resisted pressure to act. Never called his national security establishment, never called his aides, sat in his dining room and watched this unfold. And only when he saw that law enforcement was going to win, only then did he begrudgingly put out a weak-ass statement that said, you know what, go home in peace. And then, by the way, this is what you get when you steal an election.
What about the reports that said they knew that people outside the perimeter that he wanted to let in were armed?
Yeah.
So he knew there were people.
Well, he said they're not going to hurt me.
They're not going to hurt me.
They're not going to hurt me.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, and this is the thing. This is some of the most underreported stuff. And Frank will tell you this. Like, look, because you will hear the right say sometimes, not many people were arrested, no guns were confiscated. By the way, both those are untrue, but I'll take it because for as big of an event, you'd expect more guns and more arrests. Well, the reality is law enforcement was surviving. You can't effect arrests against somebody when you have nowhere to take them, you have no personnel to process them, and you're simply trying to defend one of the most important buildings in the United States of America. An arrest is the last thing on your mind. The first thing on your mind is, can I go home to my kids?
Yeah, it's hand-to-hand combat. Hand-to-hand combat. Yeah. The last thing you're doing is getting your handcuffs out, for sure.
That's right. That's right.
Not to flatter you, but you sound like a guy that should be in the middle of this again, Congressman. No, you do. You are passionate about it. You have the background, both the military and serving in Congress. And I love the idea too about the psychological approach to getting the people that follow him to re-examine what they've done. That's all that combined has to move forward. We have two people running right now who are in advanced years. I'm not judging them on that. That's not ageism. I'm just saying that, it would make more sense to have somebody in there. I remember when Kennedy was 43, he was the youngest at the time.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't sound that young anymore to me. It seems like there's a lot of people in their 40s that could do a yeoman's job in this position. What is your sense of where, this real quick, tell us about Renegade, and does that kind of play into where your future is?
Yeah, so Renegade is like, I never wanted to write a book, and I know every author says that. I actually mean it. I didn't want to do it, and because it sucks, like writing books are hard. But I looked at it and said, like, nobody wants to read a book about me, but what I can provide is a book about what happened to the Republican Party from my perspective, right? I went in as a Tea Party conservative, but I found out pretty quickly that my version of conservatism is not actually a South Carolina congressman's version of conservatism. An Illinois conservative is pretty moderate, right? I didn't know that. And so I tell the story of what's happened through my lens. So it kind of tells my story, but more importantly, the story of the GOP with a little bit of hope and how can we go forward from here. So that's why I put the book out. It did really well and I'm proud of it. But what's my future? This is the honest truth. And maybe we actually need more of this in politics, because every politician has a 20-year plan that never happens, by the way. Nobody's 20-year plan happens, right? It's good, probably good to have, but never happens. And they all are conniving and they all have this like way. I was one of those for a while. I kind of had like, I'm going to run for Senate and then governor. I was almost going to run for governor of Illinois until January 6th happened. And I have learned that I'm just going to take a deep breath. The itch to run again is coming back. Like, I needed a year and a half to really take inventory of the impact that this stuff had on me and my family. And it was tremendous impact, but the itch is coming back. And whether that's running or whether that's helping somebody run, I don't know. But, I'd certainly be open to running for higher office in 2028 or something. Maybe it's running for president. Maybe it's running with a unique message that nobody else has. I'd be open to that, even if I knew I'd lose. But right now, my focus is to make sure that Joe Biden beats Donald Trump. I don't love Joe Biden's policies, but Donald Trump is a disaster and a threat to the future of this country. And he's a weak man. You know what you need too? You need a book stand just like Frank has, so people can see your book right over your shoulder. I know. Dang it. I'm always doing something wrong.
Sell. Mm-hmm, yeah. Mm-hmm. Hey, as we wrap up, this is a great way to go that you've already led us to, but how do you, what do you consider yourself right now in terms of party? Do you have hope that the Republican Party will return in terms of its general values of smaller government, strong national defense, balanced budget, or are you like, look, I'm not identifying right now? How do you handle that?
Look, I have hope that the Republican Party will come back to some kind of a normal party. I don't know if it's going to look like the party of Reagan anymore, or, who knows? But this moment can't survive. Even if Donald Trump wins, I think that is going to be the end of this, right? As the baby boomers pass, as that anger passes, nobody ever comes out of the presidency more popular than they went in. Obviously, if Trump loses, I think it's the end of that until somebody like Vivek Ramaswamy, who's actually a very frightening individual, comes along and takes that. So I guess I'm holding out hope that eventually it comes back. I will say this to any Democrats in the White House listening to this, and it's sad that I have to do this, but you guys need to reach out to some friggin' Republicans. I mean, as far as I know, Chris Christie hasn't been contacted. I don't know if Liz Cheney has. I got contacted in January and said, when Nikki Haley drops out, we'll give you a call. And I haven't heard anything. I'm not saying this for my ego. Man, I would much rather not go out and do anything. But I also recognize that they have to reach out to those 20% of Haley voters if they want to win. Because right now, they're not going to win. You're not going to win by, fanning the flames of whatever on the left. You've got to reach the middle. So what do I identify as? I'm holding on to Republican because I don't want them to win, because I think it's much more impactful as a Republican to attack Republicans than if I was an independent. And so I'm going to hold on to that. But I'll tell you, I voted last election cycle. I voted Democratic. I actually pulled a Republican ballot to vote for Haley this year, and I intend to vote Democratic in the general election.
She's still drawing tens of thousands of votes in the primaries. It's amazing.
It's amazing. It's amazing. And what's amazing even more to me is that the Biden administration or the Biden campaign is not figuring out how to at least get half of those voters. I totally
agree.
The Democrats fumble on the 1 yard line consistently. It's unbelievable.
Missed opportunity. But hey, this was a great opportunity for us, and we're glad that you did it. We know you've been dealing with severe weather in your neck of the woods, and we're glad we could do it. Chip, any final
I just
thoughts?
think people need to hear more of what you have to say, Congressman, and I think it's great stuff.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I've enjoyed being with you guys, and I appreciate it. Yeah.